You didn't fall in love with her. You fell into a hallucination crafted by your own soul, a mirror, a symbol, a wound wearing perfume. She felt perfect, not because she was, but because your psyche made her that way. Carl Jung warned us, the anima, when unconscious, doesn't guide, she possesses. And what you called fate was actually a projection, a seductive trap laid by everything you haven't integrated. You said, "She gets me," but what she really got was access to your unresolved self. That's why it hurt so much when she left. Not because you lost her, but because the illusion collapsed. This isn't a video about women. This is a descent into the shadows of the masculine mind, into the places where longing pretends to be love and unclaimed potential becomes obsession, because maybe she wasn't your soulmate. Maybe she was your unfinished war. She appeared like a cure, but touched you like a wound, not because she was cruel, but because you were starving. You didn't meet her with wholeness, you met her with absence. And that absence had a shape, and she fit it. She didn't break you. You were already cracked. She just stepped inside the fracture. You called it chemistry. But what if it was just your loneliness finally echoing back at you? She didn't love you, she activated you. And you mistook that activation for salvation, because numbness had become your normal, and pain, at least, felt alive. She wasn't passionate, she was primal. And your nervous system called it destiny because it remembered hunger. Not the hunger for her, the hunger to feel something again. Jung was right. The anima, when not integrated, doesn't love you. She possesses you. You weren't held. You were consumed. And you didn't even flinch. You projected wholeness onto her because you couldn't find it in yourself. She wasn't a woman. She was a container for your longing. That's why her absence feels like detox. That's why her presence made you forget who you were. You didn't fall in love. You fell into projection. Every time she touched you, you felt reborn. But it wasn't intimacy. It was anesthesia. You didn't know how to feel safe unless chaos was near. So you welcomed the storm and called it warmth, because the calm had always felt too cold to trust. She never actually saw you. She saw a role, and you played it well. The intense texts, the addictive sex, the spirals of miscommunication, they were rituals, and you kept returning, not for love, but for the hangover, because at least the pain made you feel real. Let's tell the truth. You weren't just chasing her. You were chasing a part of yourself you had long abandoned. That boy who never felt chosen. That man who confused longing with love. And she was the stage for your reenactment. But not every awakening is holy. Some are hauntings that pretend to be light. You weren't weak, you were unprepared. You didn't need her devotion. You needed your own discernment. And that discernment begins when you realize the storm was never outside you. You thought she was your second chance, but what stirred when she looked at you wasn't desire, it was resurrection. She made the silence inside you scream, not because she was special, but because you were numb. She didn't bring you back to life. She reminded you that you were dying slowly, and for a moment you believed she was the cure. You mistook her for magic, but she was memory, disguised as hope. You weren't drawn to her, you were drawn to who you used to be before you collapsed. She didn't complete you. She triggered what you buried, the laughter, the chaos, the energy. None of it was hers, it was yours, forgotten. Her attention was gasoline on your abandoned dreams. You hadn't felt alive in years. So when she noticed you, your ego mistook it for a return to purpose. But she wasn't your purpose. She was a symbol of the self you stopped chasing, and symbols always disappear when mistaken for truth. This wasn't love. It was your soul screaming through a woman's smile. Jung said, projection is the soul's cry for recognition. You didn't crave her. You craved the man you were supposed to become. And when she left, that craving didn't end. It only got louder. She awoke your vitality, but never stayed to nurture it, because it was never her job. You were seduced by the echo of your own fire, And when the flame faded, you blamed her for taking what was never hers. But it wasn't theft. It was exposure. You called it heartbreak, but it was really memory. She pulled back the curtain on your stagnation. And now that she's gone, the void remains. But it's not about her. It's about everything you stopped fighting for. You weren't mourning her. You were mourning your own neglect. What did you really want? A woman or a way back into your soul? You used her like a bridge, not to her heart, but to your own abandoned life. And when she collapsed under the weight of that need, you called it betrayal. But maybe she was never the healer. Maybe she was the mirror. She wasn't the solution. She was the symptom, the surface reaction to years of self-abandonment. You didn't lose her. You lost the illusion that you could keep postponing your resurrection. And now you're left with the only thing that ever mattered, the choice to return to yourself. You didn't love her. You worshipped her, not for who she was, but for what you refused to meet in yourself. She became your sanctuary because you feared entering the war zone of your own psyche. And so you crowned her to avoid your own coronation. You placed her on a pedestal because it was easier than standing on your own feet. She wasn't a goddess. She was a projection, an escape from the confrontation waiting in your mirror. Jung warned, the more unconscious a man is, the more he deifies the woman. You weren't in awe, you were in avoidance. She didn't change. Your illusion did. You gave her divinity, and when she failed to live up to it, you called it betrayal. But she didn't betray you. She returned to being human. And you weren't ready for that. It wasn't love that blinded you. It was your own inner void, dressed in roses. You couldn't hold space for your own mess, so you cast her as salvation. And when she couldn't carry it all, you said she fell. But it was you who collapsed the moment the fantasy cracked. You needed her to be everything because you had nothing solid inside. She was beauty, mystery, meaning, because you had abandoned those within. And when she smiled, you felt seen, not because she knew you, but because you didn't. She was divine only in proportion to your disconnection. She didn't become your world. You gave her the keys because you were tired of holding your own. This is how a man self-destructs, not through violence, but through idealization. When you make her the light, your darkness only grows. And when she inevitably dims, you panic, not because she failed, but because the truth emerged. She was never the light. She was the reflection of the light you refused to claim. You didn't want a partner. You wanted a redeemer, a face to fill the silence in your soul, a voice to drown out the one inside you that whispers, "You still haven't faced it." And every time she smiled, you could pretend a little longer, but gods disappoint. And when she did, your whole belief system fell with her. Because her failure wasn't hers. It was your refusal to integrate the sacred and the broken. You made her divine, so you wouldn't have to become whole. And now all that's left is the rubble of the throne you built on sand. She didn't arrive with love, she arrived with reflection. And what she reflected wasn't beauty, it was your abandonment. Her gaze reached into a part of you that hadn't been touched in years, not because she was special, but because you were starving. And when you felt something, you called it love, but it was just withdrawal breaking. You thought you missed her. But what you missed was the version of yourself you pretended to be with her. You finally felt seen, but only because you'd spent years hiding. She didn't save you, she exposed you. She didn't break you. She revealed your scaffolding. Your worth had been built on being wanted, so when she pulled away, your identity unraveled. Not because you lost love, but because you lost the mirror that kept your mask intact. She wasn't your storm. She was your siren. She reminded you that the silence you lived in wasn't peace, it was repression. Jung warned, the shadow will find actors to play its script. You gave her a role she never agreed to. She didn't destroy your stability. She revealed it was never stable. You were performing security. She called your bluff, and now you hate her for unmasking the performance you clung to. She wasn't cruel. She was honest, in the way only chaos can be. She took what you gave her, your validation, your need, your fantasy. And when she withdrew, she took your self-worth with her, because you attached it to her attention. She didn't abandon you. You abandoned yourself long before she ever arrived. Her absence didn't hurt because she was gone. It hurt because she took the illusion with her. You weren't in love. You were in identity crisis, and she just turned on the lights. That's why her name still echoes in the empty hallways of your psyche. You built yourself around her gaze, and when it vanished, so did your shape. But that's not her crime. That's your confession. You gave her the pen. You let her write your character. And now you blame her for erasing a fiction you never questioned. This is what it means to awaken, to see the ruins you mistook for a home, to hear the silence behind the noise of being desired, and to realize she wasn't your destroyer, she was your mirror. The absence you feel is your unmasking. She felt powerful, not because she was, but because you weren't. You mistook her dominance for depth, because no one ever taught you to be sovereign. You were trained to survive, not to lead, to be agreeable, not anchored. And so when she pulled you into her world, you followed, not out of love, but from exile. Exile from your own throne. She wasn't more whole than you. She just wore the mask you abandoned. Authority, boldness, command. You bowed because you didn't know what standing looked like. She mirrored your incompletion, and you called it enchantment. But Jung would say, it's not seduction, it's substitution. You didn't choose her, your wound did, and she, like a well-cast shadow, embodied everything you lost touch with, your fire, your discipline, your discernment. She didn't control you. You surrendered before she asked. This is the cost of not being raised into kingship. You seek queens without knowing how to be a ruler, so every woman becomes a potential redeemer or a replacement, and the more beautiful she is, the more believable the illusion becomes. But she isn't your balance, she's your bypass. You wanted to be enough, but instead of reclaiming yourself, you outsourced it to her gaze. And when she looked at you with admiration, you felt real. Not because you were, but because her approval anesthetized your doubt, until it didn't. She didn't dethrone you. You never claimed the crown. You thought love meant sacrifice. But all you ever offered was your spine. You called it devotion, but it was disintegration. She wasn't toxic, she was unchallenged. You thought she was your destiny, but she was a test of whether your masculinity was rooted or borrowed. And when the test came, you flinched, you folded, you softened until you vanished, and she lost respect for the man who handed her the sword. She wasn't a goddess, she was a consequence, a reaction to your own disconnection from essence, presence, and purpose. You made her the sun because you feared becoming fire, and now the shadow lingers not because of her, but because you're still hiding, still waiting for a woman to give you back what you were meant to forge alone. You thought it was betrayal. But what you called betrayal was really your psyche pulling back the curtain. She didn't lie. You just stopped hallucinating. The spell didn't break because she changed. It broke because you woke up. And waking up always feels like being abandoned. You weren't in love with her. You were in love with your illusion of her. Her retreat felt cruel because it ended your permission to keep pretending. Jung said, "What is unconscious will rise, violently if ignored." And that goodbye wasn't cruelty. It was confrontation. She didn't leave you. She left the version of you who needed her to feel whole, and that version, the compliant, fragmented one, collapsed. Not because she took something, but because you gave her everything. You weren't betrayed. You were revealed, and revelations always sting more than lies. You built her in your mind, layer by layer, with every fantasy of being rescued, with every projection of wholeness. She became a symbol, not a person. So when she acted like a human, you felt deceived, but she wasn't your deceiver. You were. You lied to yourself about what this was, who she was, who you were. And when reality didn't match the script, you called it loss. It wasn't loss. It was alignment. The pain didn't start when she left. It started when the fantasy became unsustainable. You mistook emotional fantasy for soul connection, and now the hangover has arrived, not of her, but of your own avoidance. Avoidance of the shadow she carried, and you ignored. She played the role you wrote until she didn't, and in that disobedience, you found truth. Not about her, but about your pattern, about your need to be needed, about your fear of your own silence. She wasn't your love story. She was your mirror cracking. You didn't lose her. You lost your illusion. The wound isn't abandonment, it's disillusionment. And disillusionment, though cruel, is sacred. It means the psyche is ready to begin again. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. She wasn't chaos, she was clarity, disguised in discomfort. And when she entered your life, the storm didn't begin. It was already there. She just mirrored it unapologetically. And that mirror cracked the mask you were calling your face. She didn't ruin you. She revealed you. The sharpness in her voice echoed the dullness in your spine. You weren't a victim. You were unprepared for a woman who didn't worship your potential but tested your embodiment. And you failed that test silently. What shattered wasn't your heart. It was the image you built to avoid becoming real. You watched her slip through your fingers, but the truth is, you never held her. You held an idea of yourself that couldn't survive confrontation, and she, with every glare, every silence, every unmet need, exposed it. You thought her volatility was cruelty, but what if it was just the soul refusing to play along with your performance? You'd been skating on charm, promises, and passive charisma, and when she looked at you with fire, you froze. Not because she scared you, but because you hadn't met your own flame. She didn't ask for perfection, she asked for presence. She needed a man who could hold weight, not just cast light. But you confused attention with power, and she saw through it, not because she hated you, but because she recognized your unclaimed depth. Her sharpness didn't destroy you. It cut through the numbness. She mirrored the man you never became, and you blamed her for the reflection. You weren't hurt by her actions. You were haunted by your inaction. That's what kept you awake long after she left. Jung warned, the feminine, when projected, becomes dangerous when misunderstood. And you misunderstood everything. She wasn't here to adore you. She was here to challenge your silence. And when you crumbled, you called her cruel to avoid calling yourself unformed. But the scream wasn't hers. It was yours, echoing back through her. She didn't hurt you. She revealed what was already bleeding, the guilt, the shame, the wasted potential. All of it surfaced the moment she stopped playing along. And now your healing depends on one brutal question. Who are you supposed to become? Before you chose safety over soul. You thought it was love because it hurt to let go. But what if the pain wasn't about her? It was about the version of yourself you'd have to become without her. She wasn't your oxygen. She was your excuse, your permission to delay the transformation you've avoided for years. And every time you called her the one, what you really meant was, I'm not ready. You stayed obsessed, not because she was special, but because healing would require change, and change terrifies the ego more than loss ever could. You weren't afraid of moving on. You were afraid of who you might have to face when the noise finally stopped. And she, with all her intensity, kept the silence away. It's easier to call it heartbreak than to admit you were avoiding rebirth. Because if she was the love of your life, then you don't have to change, you just have to mourn. But if she wasn't, then you're left with no more lies. Just you, the mirror, and the man you still haven't become. Jung said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And you? You built temples in her name just to avoid building one for yourself. You called her sacred, but deep down you knew she wasn't your salvation. She was your stall, a romantic limbo dressed in poetry. You made her the epic so you wouldn't have to write your own. She became your identity, your wound, your nostalgia, all rolled into one. Because growth means surrendering who you were to become who you need to be. And surrender has always been your deepest resistance. So you held on to her shadow. Let's say it plainly, she wasn't the problem. Your resistance was. Your addiction to comfort, your craving for validation, your fear of evolution. You needed her to distract you from the battle you kept postponing. And she did, until she didn't. You weren't in love, you were in hiding. She didn't silence your potential. You buried it long before she arrived. And now that she's gone, you're left with the original question, not how do I get her back, but who will I finally become now that she's not here to stop me? Letting go isn't the end. It's the beginning of initiation, because the grief you feel, it's not for her. It's for the self you kept in chains while calling it love. And now the door is open, but only if you're willing to walk through it. So now you know, she wasn't love. She was your shadow, dressed in the skin of your desires, not a blessing, not a curse, a message from the part of you that's tired of being exiled. You kept chasing her. But what if she was just the echo of everything you abandoned in yourself? What if the real work was never to get her back, but to get you back? The man you were becoming before you outsourced your meaning, the one who doesn't confuse being wanted with being worthy. You were not destroyed by her. You were invited to wake up. So ask yourself, what parts of you did she reflect that you still refuse to claim? Whose life are you living, yours or the one designed to win her approval? What if the pain you feel is just the cost of no longer lying? Let this be the end of your worship and the beginning of your reconstruction. A quiet war, no theatrics, no revenge, just the slow, sacred return to your own soul. Subscribe if this spoke to something in you. Turn on notifications, not for motivation, but for confrontation. Because this journey isn't about feeling better, it's about becoming whole. Before you go, if she was your shadow projected, what does it mean when you crave the very woman who breaks you? In the next video, we go deeper, not into her, but into the part of you she represented, the one you've spent years avoiding. And Jung knew that's where the real battle begins.